Hello. At Nedbank Private Wealth, we really get to know our clients and their families. One thing we see a lot of is the pressure that children of very successful people can find themselves under. Yes, there are obvious advantages, of course, but there are also challenges in living up to the success that their parents and grandparents may have achieved. So we were delighted when we met with Russ Howarth and Jamie Weiner, who have researched this subject and written a book about it, The Quest for Legitimacy. Russ and Jamie have joined me today to share their findings. Welcome to you both. So Jamie, firstly, what first started you down this path towards the research that you've carried out?
So about 15 to 20 years ago, I jumped into working with high net worth people, families, because my wife grew up in a family and her parents died 35 days apart from each other. And we realized that there was a lot of challenges on the human side for families to figure out, what do you do? As I went along and did the work, I started to hear all this stuff about the rising gen. I heard them called entitled, worse things than that. And I began to kind of doubt whether that was real or true, and wanted to see if I could find out from the perspective of the rising gen what their life is like growing up in a prominent family.
So we spoke with 25 rising gen family members from across the globe. So we got perspectives from different people in different parts of the world, different cultures. And we found that there were patterns to the experience of growing up in a prominent family. So by doing the research and understanding the stories of these rising generation, we were able to give a language to something that is happening within the families that was kind of invisible almost. Everyone knew it was there, but because we've been able to give a language to it through the research, when we started speaking back to the people that we'd been researching, they were able to go, okay, I wish I'd known about this before, so that we could articulate how it was that we were feeling around growing up in, we termed it the shadow of a giant.
How do you explain growing up in the land of giants to advisors so that they work with the families but they don't have experience themselves?
You consider it in the lives of, say, royal families. So Prince Harry, Prince William, when they're born, they have no concept of the fact that they've been born into that prominent family. They had no choice, they had no say over the matter. It's just their normal, their version of normal. And I think in terms of, for advisors to understand that, is yes, it may be different from our perception of normal, but it is the client's version of their upbringing. Their life is their normal.
I think one of the things that might be helpful for advisors to think in terms of prominence rather than wealth, because it's the when you're 3 years old, you're not thinking about, oh, my parents are wealthy. You're thinking about, boy, my parents are big. There seem to be expectations for me that aren't there for everybody else. And so prominence is a bigger category than those who are wealthy, but it is a very good framework for being able to have a conversation with somebody about what's going on with your life.
In your book, when you talk about the journey or the quest, there's always the starting point, and I believe that term is a breaking point. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure. So in each of the participants that we spoke with, there were moments in their life that became pivotal or very important that perhaps weren't as obvious as COVID is to the rest of society. So one example is a guy who broke his collarbone. And a lot of the family unity was created around playing tennis together. And so he had to sit out of that. He developed an injury off the back of the breaking of the collarbone, which meant he couldn't participate in that activity. And so he started to drift along different routes to that the family would traditionally take. Now, on reflection, that became a breaking moment for him. Didn't know it at the time, but it's something that shifted the way in which his future became reality just as a result of that event.
And we didn't start off looking for breaking moments.
No.
It was really only once we had a research team from the University of Adelaide read all the transcripts and see that there were breaking moments, whether it was a 400 some odd year firm they were talking to, or a second generation firm. For the rising gen, there was something that would go along where they'd be going through life like this, and then poof, and they'd have to start to rethink about who they are and what's important to them.
Okay, thank you. And then, so that's the starting point, and then it moves into the actual journey, if you like. That's the starter gun going off, and then that's the phases you talk about, and there's 4 phases. Could you elaborate on those?
So if we start with awareness, at some point in each of the participants' lives, they became aware that something was different about them. There was something that their peers, their friendship group, the other people in the town or city they grew up with, they didn't have to deal with. One example that we use from the book is a lady who grew up in a family that had a jewelry business, and diamonds were part of that. And so her dad would come home with bags of diamonds and help her to learn how to count using diamonds. Now, when she went to school, she then discovered not everybody learns to count using diamonds. Now, at that age, it's just a moment of awareness. It's not something that perhaps has a significant impact at that time, but there will be other occasions throughout people's lives where, for example, the opportunities that are available to high net worth and ultra high net worth families are far different from those that are not in that space.
That leads to the next phase, which is a tug of war in all of us. And I think it's true for whether a high net worth family member or otherwise. I just think it's different. You grow up in a world. So in a high net world, you may grow up with there being governance, you may grow up with family meetings, you may grow up with a business that you walk through, you may hear stories at the dinner table and the only conversation may be about the business, but at some point you go out in the world and you have experiences which are different than the world you were brought up in. Sometimes when you come home and you say something new about what's going on in the world, everybody goes, boy, that's cute, but it can be a struggle.
And the 3rd phase?
So the 3rd phase is exploration. So exploration can, again, look slightly different depending on each of the individuals. But for some, there is the kind of myth of you need to go and get experience elsewhere before coming to work in, say, the family firm, as an example. And what we find is that kind of exploration is purely aligned to whether they have a role within the family business or not. But really, to get an understanding of who we are, we need to take ourselves out of perhaps the bubble we've grown up in to be able to explore and understand ourselves a bit better within that context.
I think exploration, and there's a whole chapter in the book on explorations, and it's because I think it's the most threatening for everybody, because, and maybe it's why people talk about helicopter parents and snowplow parenting, because the idea that the rising gen has hit a point that they're not going to be in the presence and the full control of the people that raise them means, and we all know it, they're going to do things that probably the parents wouldn't want them to do, right? Because they're going to explore things that are positive, but they're going to check out things and struggle through their way of exploration in lots of different ways. The good news is they can go off and do some learning that's different than what they were brought up to, so that when they come back and when they integrate all of it, they can begin to sort out and bring a different perspective back to the family, which leaves the challenge with, is the family open to that perspective? 4th one's fun, a little bit hard to explain, because immediately when I'm going to say the word, people are going to think about ownership of a business. We use the word ownership, and what we're really talking about is a point in life where you feel like you have agency, where you feel like you can have some control of your world. And ownership is a struggle because it really means that point that you feel like you can have some control about your decisions. And ironically, most of the people we interviewed, when they got to that point, they wanted to have a connection with family. They wanted to be a part of what was going on, but they were prepared to do it, and it was coming from them.
We have a huge network of professional advisors. Why is this topic seeming to be, from my perspective, certainly growing in importance? And are you seeing more inquiries from those professional advisors, those trusted advisors?
And so it's important, we feel, for advisors to understand that this is happening so that we can start to open the door to having conversations about this.
How do you open the conversation? It's a pretty sensitive area. How do you start the conversation?
The majority of the next gen don't use their parents' advisors, because the feedback we got from the rising gen is that they feel that advisors don't understand their world and only want to do things that will help support the objectives of the generation before. So I think sorting this out is a major thing that the whole space needs to do in order to kind of change things.
It's a common theme within that sector that the next generation don't take on the same advisors. And I know people are always working on that. Thank you very much for coming in and having a chat about this. And well, we look forward to seeing how the second Oxford-based event goes for you guys.
Thank you
very much.
spending time with us.
Thank you.